My next...
Asking question right
No, after we finish. Next question is for Madeleine. Madeleine, are you still there? Thank you. You mentioned gender apartheid, and as you know and as we know, thousands of women, either in demonstrations, as you mentioned, been targeted because of their gender, and throughout 44 years of existence of the Islamic regime, have been seriously discriminated against. We remember South Africa for apartheid, and lots of countries actually took action, and that's one of the decisive actions that brought South African apartheid into the knees. What can we do to bring that gender apartheid into the policy, an active policy of the governments and also human rights organizations such as ژوئن, so they would also be taking action, passing policies, passing resolutions in defense of that there is a gender apartheid and women are being targeted based on their gender by the Islamic regime in the past 44 years?
That's a great question. I mean, I think what I've seen is that there is this incredible reluctance to call gender apartheid gender apartheid. What women are saying from Afghanistan, what women are saying and I think all of you, in the context of Iran, is the same thing. There is this great fear among states that if we start calling out apartheid, then who's next? And to me, that is just the typical opt-out of an application of law. We haven't got the definition legally of gender apartheid, we know what it is. It should, for me, and I think for most of us who are talking about this, is yes, there is a need for a legal definition. But in the meantime, what we see and what is happening in relation to gender apartheid is real. I don't think the women from Afghanistan, I don't absolutely what's happening in Iran shouldn't have to wait for someone to come up with a legal decision of what's happening to you meets a criteria which would then need and require a response, and we'll dispute that for the next 5 years. No. It's very clear what's happening. And I think the international response must be similar to that, I think, the beginnings of a movement for change, which is actually to see that the way in which we can undermine and then hold accountable these regimes which use gender in multiplicity of different ways, and I mean gender inclusive of men, women, LGBT, boys, girls, the way in which they actually adhere to those gender stereotypes means that, and that means the way in which they can contain opposition, use the laws to ensure the way that they can prevent opposition actually having an effect to them, means that we have apartheid, means we need policy changes, means states have to acknowledge it, even if the law isn't there, the political decision could be there, and then we would have an appropriate response. If we start now, if we start calling states out, regimes out, not the states, because the states should be representing the people. I keep going back to what I find really abhorrent in some respects, and that is the Charter of the United Nations, which it starts off with we, the people of this United Nations, not we, the states, we, the people. And in Iran, in Afghanistan, in all the countries in conflict, it is the people who are trying to have their rights that are against the regimes, and the international community is recognizing the regimes and not the people. And that's what we have to overcome. And that's where we have to have our solidarity. And if we call it apartheid, we act on it accordingly, and we hold our states. We say to them, be honest, call it what it is, take the requisite action.
Thank you. That was really, really good answer. And since we have politicians here, I was wondering what would be your advice that politicians can take and make that gender apartheid into a policy within their countries, within their parliament?
It's actually quite simple, because if you start raising it as apartheid, it becomes a thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
You're raising it. We've got it in Britain. People started to talk it in the House of Lords. They started the conversation. Thanks very much to Shiva and her delegation who went and met with them. They're talking apartheid now. We're raising it in the Human Rights Council. We're raising it in international fora. Once it becomes something which is recognized, even without actually having the convention or anything else that needs it, we can then borrow, beg, steal from other jurisdictions to say, excuse me, this is clearly discrimination. We can do that already. It now meets the standards of what racial apartheid said. And then we use the tools we have to expose what's happening, and then we say, politically, this is apartheid. Name it, call it, act appropriately. And you will have the backing of civil society and I think all of us who actually believe in really identifying the reality of what's happening on the ground to people in ways that we didn't understand, that we can't wait for law to explain. But law will get there in the end. Call it first, then let's make it work.
Thank you. Appreciate your thoughts on both of those points. I want to go to Ruben now. You're from the, your party name is People's Party of Freedom and Democracy. What can your party do? Because we're gathered here for support for political prisoners. Everyone has shared their stories, and there's so many still are in prison. What do you think can a direct, effective action can be done that sends a very strong and decisive message to the Islamic regime that these political prisoners need to be freed immediately and unconditionally?
Yeah, I wish I had an answer for that, because then we wouldn't sit here, right? Look, I think for me and my role as a politician, I think it is important to keep raising awareness, because as we discussed before, we see that, and I understand that also the Dutch media is paying less and less attention to it. And I think it is important, if we discuss it very often in Parliament, then also the public will see that and the media will see that. And we do this in almost every debate that we have with our Minister of Foreign Affairs. Iran is on the agenda, or one or multiple members of Parliament put it in the agenda. So I think that is important. Second, I think we should also keep our government sharp to keep condemning everything that takes place, because even though those are only words, if we don't condemn it and if we don't speak out, then it also sends an implicit message to the regime, like we are condoning it or we have forgotten it, and we clearly haven't. So I think it is important to be consistent in this. And third, as I said, we have to keep looking for ways to put more pressure on the regime to stop this. And I mentioned, I agree with what has been said before. We should try to keep finding ways to put the Revolutionary Guard on the terrorist list. I think what we see now is that there are legal obstacles. I have seen a confidential report on this. I cannot say anything about it, because then I will lose my job. But there are legal objections to it. And I think what distinguishes us from Iran is the rule of law. So if we would say, okay, there are legal objections, but we put them aside, then we enter a slippery slope. And I think we shouldn't do that. But we need to make sure that we get those legal objections away. And then we will see if there are political objections. Like I said, maybe there are. Maybe there are some member states who, for diplomatic reasons or whatever, don't want to have the Revolutionary Guard on terrorist list. But let's see. Let's first make sure that the legal obstacles are taken away, and then we can have this open discussion. And then, I'm curious to see which member state now, after everything the Revolutionary Guard has done, then says, I politically oppose to have the Revolutionary Guard on a terrorist list. At least I know the Netherlands will not oppose this. The Netherlands will push for it. And we need to keep looking for ways in order to, other ways also, to put pressure on the regime. I'm also, and I know how difficult it is, but any ideas and suggestions to help protesters in Iran, I'm very open to it. I've heard these ideas about, maybe setting up a fund somehow, because people are striking, and of course, it's in every country, if you don't have your wages anymore, it is difficult, but especially given the economic conditions in Iran, it is difficult. So if there is, any initiatives like that, we can also see if there is a way to politically support that. Access to the internet, of course, is also a big issue. I know how difficult it is because the infrastructure, Western companies do not play a role in this, but still, if there are opportunities to help in providing internet access to people, we should try to help with that. So any suggestions, any ideas, I think we as politicians should be open for it because we can help to make sure that it happens.
Thank you. That was actually answering my question.